Reservoir Dogs. Script and Screenplay Analysis by Sean McHugh, 2020-25. Part 1 of 12. This film is in the long tradition of artwork studying the primary intuition's holistic understanding and immediate perception being displaced by the secondary intellect's abstracted account giving and narrow reasoning. It provides superb critical commentary on problems in Western mental processes and culture through a compendium of situational misjudgments and mistaken assumptions and thinking, in place of the wider and clearer view. Absence of the commonsensical grasp of life's subtler presentations, where these are brought to the mind surface, results in unforgiving and grave outcomes for most of the characters, especially their failure to identify the undercover policeman and the hidden love relationship present around them. The policeman with his law and high principle symbolizes the intellect, while the sexuality trumping it symbolizes the intuition. Indeed, sexuality is the intuition's fundamental expression and provides for the intuition's application to all else. The film has constant and urgent subsurface cues both directly for the characters and as theatrical license in the screenplay, enhancing them for the critical viewer, but which all stay subliminal for the characters because of their inherent limited criticality out of limited awareness or consciousness. Their minds register but fail to gain connective understanding of what happens around them, and instead at most provide expression of it only in disjointed and unresolved references in lateral contexts. Subsequently, the audience in equality with the characters, as having the same inability and poverty of mind, and failing as abjectly to see the deception and wealth of subsurface content, then justifies similar deception of them in real life by elite influential groups in society to the elite's advantage. They fail to listen and think, and hence the central and most famous part of the film is an ear being cut off, while chains in the background reflect everything linked together. Truth, as with sexuality, is unforegroundable, but minds with sufficient consciousness can align with it to perceive and understand beyond dissociated thoughts in the intellect. The film is part of mass cultural exercises the elite creates that provide ethical grounding for deception because of the evident lesser consciousness and hence value present in the deceived and shepherded. Deception is part of life and reality and must be dealt with by the deceived, not the deceivers, and where successful deception is ethically entirely in the clear, as long as there is no coercion involved. It's a masterly and coherent script and screenplay, with fabulously rich interconnections and all the content meaningful, while the characters' unstated motives bring some of the most sophisticated and compelling acting ever captured on screen. The film is one of the very greatest, finished 1992 and set in the period and Los Angeles places it's made in, while coinciding with the end of modernism as clarity of thought, deeper values, and great works across the arts. It's superficially directed by societal frontman Quentin Tarantino under agreement with the elite. This analysis is 60,000 words and based around 60 questions. 1. Why didn't Joe and Eddie arrange to meet Blonde on his prison release, or offer him a place on the robbery team at first? Blonde has just completed a 4-year sentence for crime boss Joe, but these inactions, along with Blonde self-consciously imposing himself unannounced at the office, show that Joe and Eddie know from the past that he has unprofessional tendencies, and they weren't looking for him to work for them again. They are in a difficult position, and Blonde is entirely aware of it. Indeed, he indicates he's carried out psychotic behaviour under the Cabots previously when telling Nash, who he abducts and is in the process of torturing and murdering, "You can say what you want because I've heard it all before." Subsequently, Blonde's role in the job is crowd control, which he uses for mass murder, and he has no job-related purpose for Nash, with even his friend Eddie saying that Nash shouldn't have been brought inside out of the car trunk. Joe dislikes Blonde firstly for his behaviour, then his homosexuality, but which then deflects from consideration that any other team members might be homosexual. Joe and accordingly Eddie were trying to forget about Blonde and hoping he wouldn't return to them, and when Joe's assistant Dove tells Joe in derisive tone that Blonde, with his real name, is outside, Joe at first replies indicating he doesn't know who that is, which Blonde overhears. Joe then tries to right the situation in saying he wouldn't have forgotten about him while in prison, as he'd sent him packages at least early on to encourage him to stay quiet about who his boss was. Joe should have anticipated Blonde returning and had Eddie or an anonymous third party meet him before his release to see in advance what work he would accept, including a less potentially troublesome criminal job than the diamond robbery, without exposure to civilians, that they'd organised. Joe, however, should be thinking through the wider situation of Blonde being released on parole and monitored, but instead he just tries denouncing to Blonde the authorities' indication of the same awareness as Joe of Blonde's psychopathy by their assignment to him of the harsh parole officer Scignetti, plus stringent halfway house requirements. Joe keeps quiet about his pending diamonds job and jokes that you don't lie to a guy who's just done 4 years in the slammer in pretending to have criticised Eddie before he came in. And Eddie jokes back that this is very true in disbelieving Joe, but by contrast they're now having to provide exactly such lying, even if Eddie is less discerning and aware. Eddie is excessively friendly and casual in trying to right the awkward situation, and has a line of sweat on his face and then beads on his nose and hair from the effort, in contrast to Blonde sitting back, and regardless of their wrestling bout. Joe asks Blonde what his plans are, then Eddie offers him a dog's job, then fake dog's job, then says that their operation has difficulties at present, but a big meeting is forthcoming in Las Vegas, with the suggestion that Blonde should wait for that before working for them again. This is untrue, and only issues from Eddie's disjointed and anxious thoughts out of Blonde's name Vic Vega, where Vic should wait for Vegas. When they can't dissuade Blonde, Eddie goes on to believe his own deception in supporting him, and in contrast to Joe's continued reserve, offers him a place on the current diamonds job and its criminal activity, and thence violence and sadism opportunities he's obviously come for. When Blonde gets his way at the end, against their wishes and efforts at deception, he laughs at them both directly. Indeed, his motives for keeping quiet in prison were less for being loyal to Joe and more for him being able to use the Cabots again when he got out, while their previous operation that brought him prison time, but which they escaped from, translates to a subtle desire to cause trouble back to them, particularly then in finding a way to abduct a policeman, while augmenting his existing cavalier attitude. Moreover, Eddie, with his naivety and confusion over Blonde, fails to bear these factors in mind in the final scene when insisting to Orange about Blonde's unconditional loyalty. Accordingly, immediately after Blonde's office scene is a 1970s music radio station announcement about a lucky 12th caller getting 2 tickets for that night's monster truck extravaganza with a centerpiece attraction. This reflects the film's set of robbers as monsters, where Blonde, the most monstrous with his torture scene, is the film's dramatic centre, while playing the same radio station. The centre is attended by 2 injured and soon-to-be-killed policemen, where acceptance of their employment roles compares with entry tickets, and the main agent shooting at Blonde 12 times compares with the 1 caller. Joe's worriedly optimistic response on the phone to someone owing him money, then Joe and Eddie admitting to Blonde they're having unspecified trouble, showed the present job is pressured, while contributing to the poor recruitment of Blonde, alongside undercover policeman Orange and White with his emerging mixed allegiance. White, in his parallel office recruitment meeting with Joe, also mentions a telegram from Joe about the job as aligning with the urgency, and that Diamond's robbery is unusual as they're hard to convert into money. Further, here Joe asks about White's woman partner when White hasn't seen her for over 1.5 years, indicating that Joe hasn't seen White for at least that long, and so hasn't done a job of this scale for at least that long to have to use White, and hence that is particularly needed because of business troubles. Moreover, both Cabots show familiarity with local parole officers, suggesting they've had other workers caught and later released, and hence that they're not such successful operators. Blonde's office conversation is only the film story's second chronological scene after White's, and Joe makes the story's foremost error here, where he allows the police to identify his criminal operation that Blonde had been working for but never divulged, and thence plan the sting against his diamonds job. The police still want to know who's with the illegal items Blonde was in possession of when caught, and may be able to find out by covert surveillance of him. Blonde indicates that he's allowed out from his halfway house to look for a regular job before a curfew, such that all the locations he visits may be investigated for criminality. He's self-conscious about this in the office out of subliminal awareness that it could be a serious issue, but once he gets his position on the team and focuses on his personal goals, he never suspects police infiltration, and argues with White and Pink about it all through to the infiltrator killing him. The Cabots coming to forsake Blonde in prison was failing to deal with the situation, and while Joe is purposely forgetting Blonde, he is also forgetting that Blonde may be monitored via a parole officer for the opening period after release for past and future criminality. Joe fails to prepare for the need to keep Blonde away from his offices and arrange with him a separate location to meet, including right after release if detailed conversations in prison weren't secure enough, and get him to understand. While Joe deals with Blonde's unexpected arrival, it passes him by that he should have circumvented the more serious risk of surveillance via Blonde, as beyond any lack of professionalism Joe dislikes. In contrast to Eddie's retrospective regret that he should have picked up Blonde from prison, or his halfway house if he had to go there directly, indeed this should be avoided, as officials would be observing collectors, particularly in this case, while it shows Eddie, in parallel with Joe, has just been trying to forget about Blonde, instead of thinking the situation through. Joe's subsequent instructions on the day of the job about incognito names for the robbers are too late, and moreover Blonde having a parole officer means he's been released early, but not because of telling the police about the Cabots, as he then goes on to work for them, and indeed he can't be a double agent as shown by his store killings and torture of Nash. His release instead means he must have made at least some outward agreement about good behaviour, where his movements are monitored and intentions checked, under a regular parole process, including its job-seeking and halfway house. This is also somewhat diverging from Eddie saying to Orange at the end that he never made a deal no matter what they dangled in front of him. Monitoring Blonde to get to the Cabots hence is likely to be the entire reason why Blonde has been released early, as following the police having no success with him giving them Joe's name. There is a deal here, even if Blonde isn't fully aware, while Joe and Eddie both spontaneously ask him who his parole officer is, and hence know he's been released early, but fail to think why, and instead only join Blonde in the complaining. As Blonde sheepishly speaks of the parole officer and halfway house, the camera moves ominously into his face, before he explains with more confidence to Eddie that he must get a regular job before full freedom. The placement of a harsh officer also indicates that Blonde's psychopathic tendencies are on record and further aligns with his surveillance. Joe may subconsciously sense that Blonde's situation could lead the police to him, but chooses to ignore it with pressures from his finances and from Blonde, while Blonde is focused on working for Joe again out of hatred for society and with a view to exercising his sadism. The incaution from them both means all Blonde's forbearance in prison for the Cabots comes to nothing, with his present inadvertent indication to the police who his boss was likely to have been. The Cabots were unknown to the police or they'd have shut them down previously, but the Cabots failed to think more carefully in the evolving situation now. Joe assumes they were only in danger while Blonde was in prison, with the risk of him speaking out about him, and which lessened as his sentence drew to an end, yet in fact they are in much more danger now, as the police can watch Blonde's actions. The police can then work out that the Cabots are a long-term criminal operation involving robbery, with goods conveyed by sea, road and air, as indicated in the office conversation, plus a mortuary that can dispose of bodies. Later, Orange in the evening diner tells his manager Cabot's doing a job and that he's in the team for it, as showing he was placed undercover as a potential recruit for a Cabot's robbery following surveillance of Blonde, and with the police not knowing about the diamonds robbery until then. Blonde was then the first of a series of police covert strategies, followed by Long Beach Mike turning informant, Orange's placement, the car policeman tailing Orange being driven to the planning meeting rendezvous point, choosing not to advise the store of the robbery, resulting in them setting the alarm off, and subterfuge towards the rest of the police department about the sting, resulting in the second wave of police responding as involving Nash. 2. What's Joe's mistake in accepting Eddie's arguments for having Blonde on the team? In the office, Blonde tells Joe and Eddie directly, if humorously, that Eddie doesn't know what is going on and is ruining the business. Joe agrees with Blonde, if disliking the attention drawn to Eddie as less capable, yet goes on to accept Eddie's weak arguments for having Blonde in, failing to think the contradiction through. Even Blonde, while contemptuously using Eddie, is effectively saying he shouldn't be on the team. Eddie indeed admits he doesn't know what's happening in his main mobile phone call scene and the final scene, despite his bullishness elsewhere. Blonde's a psycho, but he knows the Cabots as well as they know him, while Eddie's sobriquet is Nice Guy, in reflecting his trusting rather than more clear-sighted profile, where he particularly gets confused over the company relationship with unprofessional Blonde and switches to regarding him as a secure old friend. Blonde, however, in likewise not thinking through Joe accepting Eddie, then loses his life, with Blonde really no more knowing what's going on than Eddie, and with this particularly reflected in their equally benighted responses to the meanings of the songs they like. Joe can at least reason that if Blonde is right about Eddie, then maybe he's somehow right that he should be on the team. His decision-making under Blonde's pressure here isn't easy, although after the robbery, when Blonde is agreeably dead, and he at first keeps back from the warehouse to give himself time to think with the chance to triumph over his many problems, he still succumbs to revenge against Orange, also with Orange's condition likely fatal anyway, and he likewise meets his end. Moreover, with the police secretly investigating the Cabots after watching Blonde go to them, as the Cabot should be expecting, Eddie's idea of giving him dock work as a legitimate job and wage would only provide a pretended satisfaction from Scagnetti as part of the sting. Blonde might be released from his halfway house for the serious criminal work he wants, as free of curfews and parole, but in fact his monitoring will continue, while at recruitment for the robbery, although the job doesn't take long, he lacks any legitimate job at all as cover to offer to Scagnetti. Eddie shows further confusion in his self-conscious efforts for Blonde in saying if Scagnetti comes checking on Blonde in the docks job and he's not there, he'll first be told that he's out collecting goods from Tustin City, but then that he's out collecting from Taft Airstrip, which is a decommissioned airfield with known clandestine activity and hence the wrong thing to say. Eddie is also mistaken in his idea that Blonde is good luck for them, as just from being there he's bringing the monitoring police and then the setup and sting. Indeed, by contrast, Eddie in the final scene saying that Blonde was previously caught indicates bad luck, and which is paralleled by the remaining robbers there about to be caught in the same terms. Moreover, the talk of good luck here compares with the more realistic bad luck in White's office conversation of a caught stolen diamonds trader, which Joe should be considering. However, if Blonde brought them some good luck in the past, at least out of his psychotic and hence unexpected thinking, he does it again here in style. Although he goes on to create a massacre at the store and confirm the Cabot's fears, this is great luck in allowing most of the robbers along with the diamonds to evade the setup. Nonetheless, Eddie fails to recognise the setup and downplays Blonde's actions and hence the luck from him, and just sees the subsequent shootings from the robbers generally as wrong. As Joe is forced into offering homosexual Blonde a place, a phallic elephant tusk curves over him as Blonde doing him over or exploiting him in metaphorical sexual terms. Then a shot focusing on the pair of tusks pointing at Joe's face references the separate homosexual relation that emerges and destabilizes the job, with Joe being doubly deceived by its partners as well as the undercover police operation as via homosexual Blonde and Orange. The tusk's elephantine length towards Joe means serious violation, while recalling Brown's phallic talk in the breakfast diner that Joe dismissed. Moreover, just outside Joe's office are two light fixtures in white and orange with two white bulbs, plus a design reflecting the anus and drops of semen, all being concerns that should soon be lighting up about white and orange, and not remaining just outside of Joe's awareness. The lights further relate to those later in Orange's apartment and in the car journey conversation with others. 3. What does Joe's Mantegna wall painting say about Blonde, Nash and Joe? The painting, seen almost exclusively behind Blonde, is Italian Andrea Mantegna's Saint Sebastian Vienna version of 1459, depicting the 3rd century Roman soldier who concealed facts, was tied up and tortured but narrowly survived, then when rebuking a leader from the same enemies about cruelties, was attacked again and killed. Blonde concealed Joe from his police captors, was imprisoned, and then when rebuking policeman Nash is attacked again and killed by Nash's colleague Orange. There are 12 arrows in Sebastian that become the 12 gunshots at Blonde from Orange, while the painting's print has a white colour balance plus a blue sky, all as Eddie in the conversation subtly conflates Blonde with white over their sexuality, and as Blonde eventually becomes as meaningless and dead as blue. However, Nash equally parallels Sebastian, where he conceals his discerning about the police setup and recognising policeman Orange, is tied to a chair and tortured by Blonde but narrowly survives. Then when Orange rebukes to Eddie Blonde's cruelties to Nash, Eddie kills Nash, while being followed by further rebuke of Blonde from White, allied with Pink. The painting as given in Blonde's immediate background is also his background intentions behind coming to see Joe. Blonde, however, fails to notice the connections between the painting and himself and who he's planning to abduct, such that the infliction of Sebastian's treatment on Nash conflates with that on him and brings his death, even though this is prior to Nash's death. Joe having on his wall what is happening to Blonde and what will happen to Nash, even while Joe is averse to Blonde's sadism, shows by contrast he has the same tendencies and interests as Blonde, and that his criminal operations can't avoid them. He's not thinking through the contradiction, and they're both heading for trouble. Moreover, Joe also compares with Sebastian in concealing Blonde's history and other facts from his team, narrowly escaping the police with Blonde's imprisonment and now having financial worries, and when rebuking policeman Orange at the end, getting shot and killed. On the opposite wall is a drawing of Venice attributed to Italian Vincenzo Coronelli of 1701, where its exploitative sea trading compares with the Cabot's Dockland operations, and is exclusively seen behind Joe and then Eddie. There's a related antique world globe on Joe's desk representing navigation as he tries and fails to navigate his situation. 4. How were any robbers able to escape the store in the setup, including Pink with the diamonds? With the police waiting and ready for the robbers, all should have been captured, but instead 4 of the 6 were able to get out, and at least one of the others got a short distance, because Blonde, on hearing the alarm against his instructions, provided a murderous shooting spree, creating havoc that allowed robbers to fight their way past. White and Pink are shocked by Blonde, and White sees him as a psychopath, while Brown and Blue die in the chaos, yet Pink explains that the shooting only brought forward the police already hiding, who then escalated it further. He has to correct White's thought that the police were there when the alarm began, as making even less time and reason for them to arrive without a setup, as White nonetheless doubts. Blonde inadvertently and fortuitously disrupted the police plans of apprehending the robbers exiting from the store outside and allowed them away, although Pink also doesn't perceive or acknowledge this. The alarm provides him the opportunity he's looking for to take revenge on society and kill, but also to create trouble to locate a policeman for abduction in his own car parked ready nearby. With underhand intentions against Joe and the rest of the team, he wants to attract the police there, and hence, in contrast to Pink, doesn't so readily recognise their impossibly early arrival after his shooting starts. He surmises the police appear because of his sly actions, but in fact they appear because of Orange and the setup, his dogged machinations distracting him from the possibility of there being another team member against the rest of the team. Then, while White puts a setup out of mind because he doesn't want to suspect Orange, Blonde puts it out of mind because he wants Nash. No one at the warehouse, under their various tensions and worries, notices that Blonde with his car must have planned his abduction and not just overreacted to the alarm. Eddie on arrival wrongly says there is no setup, but in part rightly says, alongside Pink, that the police showed up because of the robbers' unprofessional shooting. White fails to see that he owes his freedom to Blonde and simmers rhetorically at him with, "What was that? I'm sorry I didn't catch it. Would you repeat it?" when indeed it's him not listening properly. This compares with Blonde's ear-cutting later, as Blonde also not listening and being no better than White. White is contrivedly trying to blame Blonde for his boyfriend Orange being shot in terms of the wider situation of having to get away from the police operating at an extra level of intensity because of Blonde's shootings. Moreover, here Blonde says to White and Pink, "You kids shouldn't play so rough, somebody's going to start crying." But then Pink has to chide him and White for starting to fight with, "Are we on a playground here?" No one listens or thinks anything through properly. 5. What does White's talk in his stationary car say about him in comparison with Blonde? White has only derision for Blonde for his civilian killings during the heist and sadism against Nash, but ultimately he kills his own 3 friends Joe, Eddie and Orange, and when talking with Orange about the heist beforehand, he describes actions he has carried out in the past that parallel Blonde's with Nash. White says that when a store worker tries to stand up to robbers and won't cooperate, to smash their nose in or cut off a finger, all as Blonde tells the workers not to set off the alarm, but which they do, and later slashes Nash's face and cuts off an ear. White's talk also takes place in his car parked in advance by the store, in parallel with Blonde's car parked in advance by the store, while White manoeuvring Orange into the rear seats compares with Blonde manoeuvring Nash into the rear boot, although White and Pink force someone out of a car while Blonde forces someone into a car. Then White, in his carjacking where he ejects a shot mother and baby in horror, parallels Blonde's indifference to Nash and his infant, although in contrast, White's experience adds to him being disturbed and psyched up at the warehouse alongside Orange's injury and other shootings. White is further exploiting Joe's project via an emerging underhand homosexual relationship with Orange, alongside Blonde exploiting it via Nash. Joe's 2 office tusks pointing towards him are White and Blonde, as well as White and Orange. White also partakes in beating and taunting Nash in parallel with, and again in advance of Blonde, yet objects to Blonde being left alone with Nash and Orange, in White trying to link Blonde's extremism with Orange's condition. He glares at Blonde as he walks out, but there is no reason for Blonde to harm Orange when Blonde isn't questioning his identity. White twice calls Blonde a psycho, but he's the same, all this with Joe's dislike of yet unwitting replication of Blonde. Characters find fault in each other, but which are also their own. White complains to Pink, saying Blonde is a psychopath, can't be worked with, is unpredictable, unprofessional, and at risk of shooting his own team members. But all these apply to White due to the romantic favoritism destabilizing his thinking. Particularly at the end, after calling Blonde a stone-cold psycho, he shoots and kills his two friends Joe and Eddie out of psychotically misguided love. Both Blonde and White have misplaced self-assurance that brings their demise, where White speaks while looking in a mirror, but with his attention staying focused outward, and Pink reminding him in their major argument that he's created a situation with Orange, also with the subliminal indication that it's a romantic situation, and if he wants to complain he should do so to a mirror. White also twice calls Blonde an asshole as reference to mentality and subliminally to homosexuality, which again he both confusedly shares. Each have right arm tattoos reflecting sexuality, and with White enhancing his from an undefinable creature once he meets Orange, as seen in his office meeting, then stationary car conversation. Blonde further has a left arm tattoo, with wings reflecting his early flight from prison, as well as getting his wings in terms of prison experience. Moreover, Eddie wanting to wrestle with Blonde in the office reflects his mental wrestling with recent and what may be forthcoming subtle observations of White as likewise gay, but which the Cabots don't know about, and then White's involvement in other team recruitment. Eddie prepares by removing something from his pocket and taking his watch off, but by contrast Blonde leaves his on, worn on his right wrist as partly indicating his contrary disposition alongside his tattoos. Then in the White-Blonde conflation, Joe calls Blonde's toothpick Vic before Eddie overhears and copies him, as rhetorically referencing hopes of escape from prison by picking locks, yet it's White seen with a toothpick in his mouth in the diner and walking thereafter. Alongside this premonition of White getting caught on the job, his and Blonde's parallel unprofessionalism is exampled in their using cigarette lighters, respectively for deceiving Pink into staying at the warehouse while avoiding suspecting Orange, and for burning Nash. Furthermore, White and Blonde haven't seen the Cabots for a similar lengthy period. Joe's opening pleasantry with White about his heterosexual relationship finds that it ended over 18 months ago, and Joe's opening pleasantries with Blonde find that the Cabots haven't been to visit him, at least in the recent past. He has to recall who Blonde is, then Eddie walks in briskly in fake upbeat tone with, "I see you sitting there, but I don't believe it," and tries to persuade himself later that Blonde is a very good friend of mine, when Joe never even wanted to see him again. At the end, White listens to Eddie in one of Joe's warehouses with the diamonds, explaining that Blonde was caught by police in one of Joe's warehouses with hot items. White will momentarily likewise be caught, with only White giving this term for the building prior to Eddie, while these subliminal thoughts apply to all of them there. Eddie's Vicki Lawrence song at the breakfast that parallels Blonde's and White's real names, as given respectively in The Office and by Desperate Injured Orange, underlines their similar combination of flaws, particularly as conflated by Eddie. To be continued. Any questions?